Dad sold my inherited art collection without asking. Have you ever walked into a room and felt your entire world collapse in a single breath? That moment when your lungs forget how to work, when your heart drops so hard you swear you can hear it shatter against your ribs. I stood in the empty studio, my studio, staring at bare walls where 12 irreplaceable paintings used to hang. Paintings my grandmother had left specifically to me. Paintings that were supposed to be mine forever. And just like that, they were gone, sold. By the one person who was supposed to protect them. My own father. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, if you've ever had something precious stolen from you by the people you trusted most, stay with me through this story. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me if you'd ever be able to forgive what happened next, because honestly, I'm still not sure I have. Let me take you back to where this nightmare actually began. 3 months earlier, my grandmother Alina passed away at 87. She was an art collector, a woman of refined taste who'd spent 60 years building a collection that told stories, not the kind of art you buy to match your couch, real art. Pieces with history, with soul, with meaning that went deeper than their price tags. I was 26 when she died, working as a junior curator at a small gallery in Portland, barely making rent but happy. Art was my life, had been since I was 8 years old, and Grandma Alina first took me to the Portland Art Museum. She held my hand as we walked through those halls, and she didn't just show me paintings, she showed me worlds. Art isn't about what you see, Amber, she'd whispered to me that day, kneeling down so we were eye to eye. It's about what you feel, it's about the story the artist couldn't put into words. I fell in love that day, not just with art, but with the way she saw it, the way she understood it. For 18 years after that, every Sunday I wasn't away at college, I'd visit her house. We'd sit in her studio, a converted sunroom with perfect northern light, and she'd tell me the story behind each piece. There was the abstract expressionist work by a Korean artist she discovered in a tiny Seattle gallery in 1983. There was the haunting portrait series by a Native American artist whose work now hung in major museums. There were landscapes, still lifes, mixed media pieces that seemed to shift meaning depending on your mood. 12 pieces total that she'd specifically set aside for me over the years. These are yours, Amber, she'd say, touching each frame gently. When I'm gone, these tell our story. Promise me you'll keep them together. Promise me you'll remember why each one matters. I promised God, I promised her so many times. When she died that September, I wasn't prepared. You're never prepared, even when someone is 87 and you know it's coming. The funeral was small, elegant, exactly what she would have wanted. My father, her only son Richard, gave a beautiful eulogy about family and legacy. My mother dabbed tears carefully so her mascara wouldn't run. My younger brother Kyle stood with his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable in his suit. And me, I stood there feeling like I'd lost the only person who truly understood me. The will reading happened a week later. That's when things got complicated. Grandma Alina's estate was substantial. The house in Portland's West Hills worth easily $2 million, investment portfolios, savings, and of course the art collection, about 60 pieces total, accumulated over 6 decades. The lawyer, Mr. Chen, sat across from us in his downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. The estate is divided primarily between Richard and his children, Mr. Chen began, reading from the thick document. My father sat up straighter, that calculating look crossing his face that I'd seen 1,000 times when he was running numbers for his commercial real estate business. Then came the part that changed everything. However, Mr. Chen continued, Alina was very specific about certain items. The art collection is to be divided as follows. 12 specific pieces listed in Appendix C are to go directly to her granddaughter, Amber Mitchell, with the express instruction that they remain together as a collection and not be sold during her lifetime. My father's jaw tightened, just barely, but I saw it. The remaining pieces, Mr. Chen went on, are to be divided between Richard and Kyle with the provision that any sales must first be offered to family members. The rest of the meeting blurred, something about the house being sold and proceeds split, something about personal items, but I barely heard any of it because I was thinking about those 12 paintings. They were mine, really, officially mine. After the meeting, Dad pulled me aside in the hallway. The marble floors echoed with every step, making the space feel cold despite the warm November sun streaming through the windows. Amber, we need to talk about this art situation. My stomach clenched. What situation? Grandma left those pieces to me. I understand that, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when explaining business things to people he thought didn't understand business. But we need to be practical here. Some of those pieces are quite valuable. The estate has taxes to pay and the will says they're mine, not for sale. That was her explicit instruction, Dad. His expression hardened. Your grandmother was sentimental in her old age. She didn't understand the financial realities. She understood exactly what she was doing. I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. She collected art for 60 years. She knew what every piece was worth, and she still chose to leave those specific 12 to me with instructions not to sell them. That means something. It means she was being emotional instead of practical, he said flatly. Look, I'm not saying we sell them all, but maybe we could sell a few of the more valuable ones and you could keep the others. You'd still have pieces to remember her by, and the money could help you. Do you know what you're sitting on with some of those pieces? The Nakamura alone is worth probably $70,000. You could put a down payment on a house. I don't want to sell them, I said, my hands balling into fists. They're not about money, they're about us. About every Sunday we spent together, about every story she told me, about 18 years of her teaching me to see the world differently. Dad sighed, that heavy, disappointed sigh that made me feel like a child throwing a tantrum. You're being naive, Amber. Art is an investment. It's meant to be bought and sold. Your grandmother would have understood. No, I interrupted. She wouldn't have understood. That's exactly why she put those instructions in her will. She knew you'd think this way, and she wanted to protect those pieces from being treated like stocks and bonds. We stood there in that cold hallway at an impasse. Other people from other meetings walked past us, their shoes clicking on marble, their voices low murmurs that faded into air conditioning and elevator chimes. Just think about it, Dad finally said. Practically, you're living in a tiny apartment making barely $40,000 a year. This could change your life. He walked away before I could respond, but his words stuck with me like thorns. Because he wasn't entirely wrong, I was barely scraping by. My apartment in southeast Portland was tiny, with thin walls and a radiator that clanged all night. I'd been applying to curator positions at bigger galleries for 2 years with no luck. Student loans hung over me like storm clouds. But those paintings weren't about money. They were about identity, about belonging to something bigger than balance sheets and profit margins, about carrying forward the legacy of a woman who'd taught me that beauty and meaning matter more than price tags. I told myself Dad would drop it, that he'd respect Grandma's wishes even if he disagreed with them. I should have known better. The 12 paintings were moved to my apartment the following week. I'd rearranged everything to make space, pushing my bed against one wall, moving my tiny dining table into what was technically supposed to be a walk-in closet. The paintings filled my studio apartment, transforming it from a cramped living space into something that felt sacred, like a gallery, like a shrine to everything Grandma Aliner had taught me. I spent hours just looking at them. The Nakamura abstract with its bold strokes of crimson and gold. The White Horse Portrait Series, 3 paintings of indigenous elders that seemed to look into your soul. The Turner landscape that Grandma had found at an estate sale in 1991, not knowing it was a minor work by a major artist until it was authenticated years later. The Chen still life with its impossible shadows. The Martinez mixed media piece that incorporated her grandmother's wedding veil. Each one had a story, each one was part of our story. I posted photos on Instagram tagging them Aliner Mitchell Collection. My friends from art school commented, amazed. My coworkers at the gallery were envious. You're so lucky, they kept saying, and I knew I was. For 6 weeks, everything was perfect. I'd come home from work and instead of flopping onto my bed in exhaustion, I'd make tea and sit with the paintings. I'd remember Grandma Aliner's voice telling me why she'd bought each one, what had drawn her to it, how it made her feel. Then Dad called on a Friday night in early January. Amber, I need to store a few things at your place. I was stirring pasta sauce, phone balanced on my shoulder. What kind of things? Just some inventory from the gallery, temporary. We're doing renovations on the storage space and I need to move Pi. CES around for a week or 2. My father's gallery was really more of a showroom for his commercial real estate ventures, a space where he'd display art from his own collection to impress clients. It was all very corporate, very transactional, everything Grandma Aliner's collecting wasn't. I don't really have space, Dad. My apartment is pretty full with It's just temporary, he said, that edge creeping into his voice. The edge that meant he'd already decided and I was just being difficult by not immediately agreeing. A week, maybe 10 days, I'll have them picked up and moved to the new storage after that. Something in my gut twisted, but this was my father, and I wanted to believe he'd dropped the whole idea of selling Grandma's paintings, that he'd accepted her wishes. Okay, I said slowly, but I really don't have much room. I'll send someone Monday morning, 9 a.m. Be there to let them in. He hung up before I could respond. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. 2 men in a moving truck showed up at exactly 9 professional movers with a work order from my father's company. They brought in 8 framed pieces, all from Dad's own collection, corporate-looking abstracts and photographic prints, the kind of art that looked expensive but felt empty. Where do you want these? The older mover asked. I guess, just lean them against that wall. I gestured to the only empty wall space I had near the kitchenette. They worked efficiently, stacking the pieces carefully, protective blankets between each frame. It took maybe 20 minutes. They left and I stared at the additions to my already cramped space, feeling vaguely uneasy but not sure why. Dad's pieces would be gone in a week or 2. It was fine, everything was fine. Except it wasn't. I came home from work on Wednesday, 5 days after the movers had come, and my door was unlocked. Not broken, not damaged, just unlocked like I'd forgotten to lock it that morning, except I never forgot to lock my door. Living in the city teaches you that much. My heart started hammering before I even pushed the door open. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, dishes in the sink from breakfast, bed unmade, jacket thrown over the chair, everything normal, everything fine. Except for the wall where the 12 paintings had hung. It was empty. Completely devastatingly empty. White walls with nothing but the small nail holes where the frames had been, like ghosts, like someone had reached into my chest and pulled out my lungs. I couldn't breathe, literally couldn't pull air into my body for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. I stumbled forward, staring at the empty space, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. They were gone. All 12 paintings, every single one. And then I saw it on my kitchen counter, weighted down by a coffee mug, a note in my father's handwriting. Amber, moved the pieces to proper climate-controlled storage for safekeeping. Your apartment isn't secure enough for this value. We'll discuss details this weekend. Dad. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. Moved them, he'd taken them, without asking, without even telling me he was coming. I called him immediately. It went to voicemail. Dad, what the hell? Where are my paintings? You can't just take them. Call me back now. I called 3 more times, voicemail every time. I called my mom. Honey, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Your father probably just wants to keep them safe. You know how he worries. He stole them from my apartment, Mom. Don't be dramatic, he didn't steal anything, he's just being protective. I hung up on her. I barely slept that night, lying in bed staring at the empty walls. In the morning, I called Dad's office. His secretary, Margaret, answered in her crisp professional voice. Mitchell Properties, how may I help you? Margaret, it's Amber, I need to talk to my dad right now. I'm sorry, Amber, he's in meetings all day. Then interrupt him, this is an emergency. I really can't. Tell him if he doesn't call me back in the next hour, I'm calling the police and reporting the paintings stolen. Silence, then quietly, I'll give him the message. He called back 45 minutes later. You're being ridiculous, he said instead of hello. The paintings are safe, they're in proper storage where they should be. They should be in my apartment because they're mine, I shouted into the phone, not caring that my neighbors could probably hear through the thin walls. You had no right to take them, no legal right. Those paintings were left to me in Grandma's will. I'm protecting your inheritance. By stealing it. Don't use that word, his voice went cold. I'm your father, I'm looking out for your best interests because clearly you're too emotional to do it yourself. Where are they, Dad? Silence. Where are my paintings? In storage, professional, climate-controlled storage. Where? WIC. Storage facility. That's not important right now. WHICH facility. Amber, calm down. I swear to God, if you don't tell me where my paintings are right now, I'm calling the police. Those paintings were explicitly left to me in a will. You removed them from my home without my permission. That's theft. I don't care if you're my father. Another silence, longer this time. Then he sighed, that disappointed sigh again. They're not in storage. My blood went cold. What? I sold them. The world tilted, actually tilted, like the floor had become a ship's deck in a storm. You, what? I sold them. The buyers came Tuesday. I got an excellent price, much better than you'd have gotten if you tried to sell them yourself eventually. The money is going into a trust for you. You'll thank me when. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember the next few minutes at all. I came back to myself sitting on my kitchen floor, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking like I was freezing even though the apartment was warm. He'd sold them, all 12. The paintings Grandma Alina had explicitly said not to sell. The paintings she'd left specifically to me with detailed instructions about keeping them together. The paintings that held 18 years of Sundays and stories and everything that had connected me to the most important person in my life. Gone, sold, to strangers who'd hang them in their homes or warehouses or wherever rich collectors keep art they buy as investments. And my father, my own father, had done it, behind my back, without my permission, without even the basic courtesy of a real conversation. I called Mr. Chen, the estate lawyer, that afternoon. My voice was hoarse from crying. Mr. Chen, my father sold the paintings that were left to me. Can he do that legally? I heard papers rustling. Were the paintings formally transferred to your name? Did you sign the transfer paperwork? My stomach dropped. What paperwork? After a will reading, there's usually paperwork to officially transfer assets to beneficiaries. Physical assets like art require documentation, especially for insurance and authentication purposes. Did you sign anything? No, the will reading was only 6 weeks ago. I thought they were just mine, the will said. The will designated them for you, Mr. Chen said gently. But until the estate is fully settled and assets are formally transferred, technically they're still part of the estate which your father is executor of. So he can just sell them, even though Grandma specifically said not to. It's complicated. Executors have broad authority to manage estate assets, but they're also supposed to follow the deceased's wishes. If he sold them against explicit instructions in the will, you could potentially challenge it, but he paused. It would mean suing your father, taking him to court. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and messy, and there's no guarantee you'd win. I thanked him and hung up, feeling hollow. That weekend, Dad finally agreed to meet me, not at his house, not at his office, at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. He was already seated when I arrived, looking calm and composed in his expensive suit, sipping an Americano. I sat down across from him, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I hadn't ordered but the barista had brought anyway, maybe sensing I needed something to hold onto. The money is in an account for you, Dad said before I could speak. $247,000. The collection sold for more than I expected. The Nakamura alone went for $85,000. I don't want the money. Don't be childish. I want the paintings back. He actually laughed. That's not possible. They're sold, gone. The buyers have already taken possession. Who bought them? That's confidential. Who bought my paintings, Dad? He leaned back, studying me like I was a difficult client refusing a reasonable deal. Various buyers. A gallery in Seattle took 3. A private collector in San Francisco bought 4. The others went to different collectors. They're scattered now. Even if you wanted to buy them back, which you couldn't afford anyway, it would be nearly impossible to track them all down. Scattered, the word hit like a punch. Grandma Alina had made me promise to keep them together, and now they were scattered across the West Coast, split up, their collective story destroyed. How could you? My voice came out broken. She specifically said not to sell them. She left them to me with explicit instructions. She left you a burden, he said flatly. 12 paintings you couldn't afford to insure properly, that you were keeping in a tiny apartment with no security, no climate control, no protection. I did what was practical. What needed to be done? You're young, emotional, not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly enough to know you stole from me. I protected you from your own sentimentality. You betrayed me, the words came out quiet but sharp. And you betrayed her, your own mother, Dad. She trusted you to respect her wishes and you sold her legacy for what? $250,000 you don't even need to prove some point about being practical. His face hardened. I don't expect you to understand right now, maybe in a few years when you've matured, when you understand how the world actually works. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Other customers glanced over. Don't contact me, don't call me, don't text, we're done. Amber. I mean it, I don't have a father anymore. I walked out, leaving my untouched tea on the table and my father sitting there looking shocked that I'd actually meant it. The next few weeks were a blur of anger and grief. I'd lost Grandma Leaner and now I'd lost the only pieces of her I had left. I felt robbed twice over. My apartment walls stayed empty because I couldn't bear to hang anything else there. I went to work, came home, stared at blank walls and tried to figure out what to do with the rage burning in my chest. My mom called repeatedly, I didn't answer. Kyle texted, trying to play mediator. I responded once, he stole from me, I'm not interested in both sides. That money sat in the account Dad had set up, untouched. I didn't want it, didn't want to acknowledge it. It felt like blood money, like accepting it would mean he'd won. But I'll be honest, I had no idea what to do with the anger. I felt powerless, betrayed, violated. My father had stolen the most precious things I owned, and legally there was nothing I could do about it. Mr. Chen had been clear, suing would cost tens of thousands I didn't have with no guarantee of success. So I did what I'd always done when I felt overwhelmed. I went to see art. The Portland Museum was having an exhibition on contemporary Pacific Northwest artists. I wandered through the galleries trying to feel something besides rage, trying to reconnect with why art had mattered so much in the first place. And that's when I saw it. A small placard next to one of the exhibition rooms, gallery space available for rent, private showings, studio space, or creative projects. Inquire at main desk. Something clicked in my brain, an idea so perfect, so beautifully right that I actually stopped walking and stood there in the middle of the museum with a smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. My father had taken my art, he'd taken my inheritance, he'd betrayed my grandmother's trust and mine. But that money, that blood money sitting in an account, was technically mine, and I knew exactly how to use it. I walked to the main desk and asked about the gallery rental. The woman explained it was a smaller space the museum rented out for private events, exhibitions, or artists needing studio space. 1,000 square feet with excellent lighting, secured, climate-controlled. How much? I asked. $3,500 a month with a 6-month minimum lease. I did the math quickly. Even with the full 6 months paid up front, installation costs, supplies, and everything else I'd need, I'd barely make a dent in that $247,000. I'll take it, I said. Don't you want to see it first? I smiled, and something in that smile must have looked slightly unhinged because she actually took a small step back. Yes, I said, yes, I'd love to see it. The space was perfect. Hardwood floors, white walls, track lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows on one side looking out onto the museum's sculpture garden. It was everything a working artist could want. I signed the lease that afternoon. That night, I finally opened my laptop and looked at that bank account for the first time. $247,000, money from selling pieces that should never have been sold, money that represented my father's betrayal. I smiled at the screen. Okay, Dad, I thought, you wanted me to be practical with this money, let me show you practical. And then I started planning exactly how I was going to turn his betrayal into the most beautiful revenge he could never have imagined. But that's a story for what came next, and trust me, what came next changed everything. The gallery space became my obsession. For the first week, I just sat in there. Empty hardwood floors, white walls, natural light pouring through those massive windows. I'd bring my laptop and coffee and sit cross-legged in the center of the room, planning. Because this wasn't just going to be a studio, this wasn't just going to be some private space where I painted and processed my grief. This was going to be a statement, a monument, A living, breathing exhibition that told the story of what my father had done and what my grandmother had meant to me. I called it the Eleanor Mitchell Memorial Collection. The concept was simple but devastating. I would recreate every single one of the 12 paintings my father had sold, not copies. I'm not a forger, but my own interpretations, my own responses to each piece. Each painting would be accompanied by a placard telling its story, where Grandma Eleanor had found it, why she'd bought it, what it had meant to her, what memory I associated with it, and the fact that my father had sold it against her explicit wishes. It would be part art exhibition, part memorial, part public shaming. I started that same week. The Nakamura abstract was first, those bold crimson and gold strokes that looked like fire or rage or both. I'd never been much of an abstract painter, but I stood in front of a blank canvas and just let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The betrayal, the anger, the grief of losing Grandma Eleanor and then losing her legacy too. My version came out darker than the original, deep reds that looked almost like dried blood, gold that seemed tarnished, corrupted, jagged strokes where Nakamura's had been fluid, but it was honest. It was what that painting meant to me now, filtered through everything my father had done. I worked 12, 14, 16 hours a day. I'd go to my regular job at the gallery from 9 to 5, then head to my space at the museum and paint until midnight or later. I lived on coffee and takeout. I stopped answering most calls except from a few close friends who understood I was processing something big. My coworker Jessica came to visit me one evening about 2 weeks in. I just finished my interpretation of the White Horse portraits, 3 canvases showing indigenous elders, except in my version their eyes were closed like they were mourning, like they couldn't bear to witness what had happened to them. Amber, Jessica said softly, standing in the doorway, this is intense. I was covered in paint, exhausted, probably looking slightly manic. It's necessary. Have you talked to your dad at all? No, I didn't look away from the canvas I was working on, and I'm not going to. Your mom called the gallery looking for you, she sounded worried. She chose his side. Jessica walked further into the space, studying the 2 completed pieces and the one I was working on. What are you going to do with all this when it's done? I finally looked at her and I must have smiled because she actually looked slightly concerned. I'm going to invite everyone to see it, media, art critics, the entire Portland arts community, everyone who knew my grandmother, and I'm going to tell them exactly what happened to her collection. Amber. He humiliated me, Jess. He stole from me. He betrayed his own mother's dying wishes for money. You think I should just, forgive and forget, pretend it didn't happen? I think you should make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, she said carefully. Revenge can feel good in the moment, but... This isn't revenge, I interrupted. This is truth. This is making sure everyone knows what he did. This is making sure my grandmother's story doesn't just disappear because he decided dollars matter more than legacy. Jessica left looking worried, but I didn't care. I was right. I knew I was right. The work consumed me. Each painting took days, sometimes a full week. I didn't just recreate the visual elements, I tried to capture the feeling of each piece filtered through my new understanding of loss and betrayal. The Turner landscape became a storm-ravaged scene, beautiful but violent. The Chen still life became a Vanitas painting, full of symbols of death and decay. The Martinez mixed media piece, which had incorporated her grandmother's wedding veil, I recreated using shreds of my grandmother's scarves that I'd inherited separately. I tore them into pieces and embedded them in layers of paint and resin, beautiful but broken. 6 weeks in, I had 8 of the 12 pieces completed. The gallery space had transformed from empty white box to something that felt sacred and angry at the same time. I'd installed the placards next to each piece, telling their stories in clear, unflinching language. The Nakamura Abstract, 1984, purchased by Eleanor Mitchell at a Seattle gallery for $2,800. She told me this painting reminded her of the sunset the day she met my grandfather. It hung in her studio for 40 years. My father sold it for $85,003 weeks after her death against her explicit written instructions. Current location, unknown. The White Horse Portrait Series, 1997. 3 paintings given to Eleanor Mitchell by the artist after she championed his work when major galleries ignored him. She said these elders' faces reminded her that dignity can't be bought or sold. My father sold all three for $54,000 total. Current location, unknown. And so on, each placard a small knife, precise and sharp. I was working late on a Thursday night in early March, almost 2 months after my father had stolen the paintings, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my gallery space. The museum was closed to the public, but artists with rented spaces had keycard access after hours. I assumed it was another artist and didn't look up from the canvas. I was working on my interpretation of a small abstract piece by an artist named Rivera that Grandma had bought at a student exhibition in 2003. Then I heard his voice. "So this is what you've been doing with the money." I spun around, paintbrush still in hand, my heart suddenly hammering. My father stood in the doorway, looking out of place in his expensive suit and Italian leather shoes. His face was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were slightly clenched at his sides. "How did you know I was here?" "Your mother has a friend who volunteers at the museum. She mentioned seeing you here at odd hours. I got curious." He stepped into the space, his eyes moving from painting to painting, reading each placard. With every word he read, his expression got harder. "What the hell do you think you're doing? What does it look like I'm creating art?" "You're creating a hit piece." He gestured sharply at the nearest placard. "This is libel, Amber, you're publicly accusing me of." "Of what?" "Doing exactly what you did." I set down my paintbrush very carefully, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Every word on those placards is factually accurate. You did sell those paintings. You did do it against Grandma's explicit instructions. You did do it without my permission. Which part is libel?" "You're making me look like some kind of villain." "You are a villain in this story, Dad. You stole from your own daughter. You betrayed your own mother's dying wishes. Those are just facts." His face flushed red. "I did what was necessary, what was practical. I've explained this. And I've explained that I don't accept your explanation. This," I gestured around the gallery at my interpretations hanging on the walls, "this is my explanation, my response. My way of making sure Grandma Aliner's story doesn't disappear just because you decided to erase it." He walked slowly around the space, studying each painting, each placard. I watched him read the words I'd written about his mother, about the collection she'd built, about the promises she'd made me keep, about what he'd done. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. "If you show this publicly, you'll destroy our family. You destroyed our family when you stole from me. I'm warning you, Amber, if you go through with whatever public exhibition you're planning, and I'm assuming that's the plan here, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you that actions have consequences. You want to publicly humiliate me? Fine, but don't expect me to pay for your health insurance anymore. Don't expect help with those student loans. Don't expect to be welcome at family events. Don't expect." "I don't want any of that," I said, my voice rising. "I don't want your money. I don't want your health insurance. I don't want to come to family events where I have to sit across from someone who stole from me and pretend everything is fine. I don't want anything from you except for you to admit what you did was wrong. I won't apologize for making a sound financial decision. Then we have nothing else to talk about." We stared at each other across my gallery space, across this monument I'd built to his betrayal. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. Somewhere in the museum, a security guard's radio crackled. "Last chance," Dad said quietly. "Take this down, accept that what I did was for your own good. We can move past this." "No. Amber. Get out of my gallery." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or hurt, like he genuinely couldn't believe I was choosing this path, choosing public truth over private peace. "You're going to regret this," he said. "The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner. Now get out." He left without another word, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, fading down the hallway, gone. I stood there shaking, adrenaline flooding my system, my hands trembling so hard I couldn't have held a paintbrush if I tried. But I also felt something else, something like power, like I'd finally taken back some control of this situation. He knew about the exhibition now, and he was scared. I could tell he was scared because he'd threatened me, which meant he understood that what I was doing had the potential to hurt him. Good. I wanted it to hurt. I finished the remaining 4 paintings in a fever over the next 3 weeks. I barely slept. I stopped going to my regular job Jessica covered for me, telling our boss I had a family emergency, which wasn't entirely a lie. I existed in that gallery space like it was a cocoon, creating and recreating, pouring every ounce of grief and rage into canvas and paint and truth. The final piece, my interpretation of a small landscape by a local Portland artist my grandmother had bought in 2015, came almost peaceful, soft grays and blues, a coastline at dusk, quiet and melancholy. I'd spent so much rage on the other 11 that this last one felt like exhaling, like acceptance maybe, or at least the beginning of it. I installed it on the wall with the others, wrote its placard, and stepped back to look at the complete exhibition. 12 paintings, 12 stories, one devastating truth. It was beautiful, it was angry, it was honest. And I was ready to show it to the world. I spent a week on logistics, sent invitations to every art critic in Portland, reached out to journalists at the Oregonian, Willamette Week, even some regional art publications, contacted everyone who'd known my grandmother, her friends from the art community, collectors she'd mentored, artists she'd championed. I even found contact information for some of the artists whose work had been in her collection and sent them personal invitations. The response was immediate and intense. Art critics emailed back within hours confirming attendance. One journalist from the Oregonian wanted to do a feature story. An art blogger with a significant following asked if she could do a video walkthrough. People who'd known Grandma Aliner sent messages full of grief and outrage, promising to attend, asking what they could do to help. The exhibition date was set for the first Saturday in April. I titled it simply, 12 Paintings, A Legacy Betrayed. 3 days before the opening, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Amber, please, her voice was thick with tears, please don't do this. Mom, your father is a mess, he's barely sleeping, he's talking to lawyers about suing you for defamation, this is tearing our family apart. He tore it apart when he stole from me. He was trying to protect you. By betraying his own mother's dying wishes, by stealing property that was legally designated for me, that's protection. You're being so stubborn about this, so cruel, can't you see what this is doing to him, to all of us? I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall of my gallery space. Mom, did you know, before he did it, did you know he was planning to sell the paintings? Silence. Mom. He mentioned he was thinking about it. He said you couldn't properly care for them, that it would be better to. And you didn't tell me, my voice came out flat. You knew he was planning to steal from me and you didn't warn me. It wasn't like that. What was it like then? Explain it to me. Explain how my own mother knew my father was about to steal the most precious things I owned and didn't give me a heads up, didn't tell me to get them somewhere safe, didn't even try to talk him out of it. I thought he knew best. I thought, she was crying now, really crying. I thought you'd eventually understand, that you'd see he was right. Well, I don't see that. I see that both my parents betrayed me, so no, Mom, I'm not canceling the exhibition. I'm not protecting him from the consequences of his own actions, and honestly, I'm not sure I can forgive you either. I hung up before she could respond. Kyle called next, my younger brother playing peacemaker like always. Amber, come on, this is getting out of hand, can't we all just sit down and… Did he give you any of the money from the paintings he sold? What? The paintings, Dad's portion of Grandma's estate. Did he give you anything, or was stealing from me enough profit for him? It's not about the money. Answer the question, Kyle. Silence, then quietly, he paid off my car loan, said it was an early inheritance. I laughed, harsh and bitter. So he stole my inheritance to give you an early one, that's perfect, that's just perfect. Amber, I didn't know that's where the money came from. Yes, you did, or you suspected, but it was easier to just accept it and not ask questions, right? That's not fair. You're right, none of this is fair, that's exactly my point. I hung up on him too. The night before the exhibition, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tiny apartment staring at the ceiling, running through worst-case scenarios. What if nobody came? What if people sided with my father? What if I'd miscalculated how people would react? But I also thought about Grandma Alina, about 18 years of Sundays, about every promise she'd made me make about keeping those paintings together, about honoring their stories, about understanding that art was about more than money. I thought about the last conversation we'd had before she went into hospice care. She'd been weak, her voice barely above a whisper, but she'd gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Amber." "Anything, Grandma." "Don't let them turn everything into dollars and cents. Don't let them forget that beauty and meaning matter, that stories matter, that you matter, not just what you can produce or earn." "I promise." "Your father, he's a good man, but he's forgotten this. He thinks everything can be reduced to balance sheets. Don't let him do that to you. Don't let anyone do that to you." I'd promised, and now I was keeping that promise, even if it meant going to war with my own family. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. I got to the museum 2 hours before the exhibition was scheduled to open, making final adjustments, straightening placards, making sure the lighting was perfect. Jessica showed up at 10 to help set up the reception table. "You ready for this?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." The first guests arrived at 11, a trickle at first, then a steady stream: art critics with notebooks, journalists with recording equipment, people who'd known my grandmother, many of them elderly, some walking with canes or walkers, younger artists who'd heard about the drama and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. By 11:30, the gallery space was packed. At least 80 people crowded in, studying the paintings, reading the placards, talking in low, intense voices. I stood near the entrance, watching reactions. I saw outrage, I saw tears, I saw people taking photos of the placards, posting on social media. I saw art critics scribbling furiously in notebooks. An elderly woman approached me, Martha Chen, one of Grandma's oldest friends from the art collecting world. "Amber dear, Alina would be so proud of you." "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you understood what mattered, and this," she gestured around the gallery, "this proves she was right. What your father did was unconscionable. The whole collecting community is horrified." Over the next hour, dozens of people told me similar things. They shared their own stories of knowing my grandmother, of the pieces she'd collected, of the advice she'd given them. They expressed outrage at what my father had done. Several people, collectors themselves, talked about adding provisions to their own wills to prevent similar situations. A journalist from Willamette Week interviewed me for 20 minutes, asking detailed questions about the timeline, about my relationship with my grandmother, about what I hoped to accomplish with the exhibition. "I want people to understand that art isn't just about market value," I told her. "These paintings represented a relationship, a legacy, a lifetime of careful, intentional collecting, and my father destroyed that for money he didn't even need. I want people to know that happened. I want there to be a record of what he did." She nodded, still recording. "Has he seen the exhibition?" "He knows about it. Whether he'll actually come, I don't know." But of course he came. At 1:15, I saw him enter the gallery. He'd brought reinforcements, my mother on one side, Kyle on the other, and a man I didn't recognize in an expensive suit who I assumed was the lawyer he'd threatened to bring. The crowd literally parted for them. People stopped talking, stopped moving, just watched as my father walked slowly around the gallery, looking at each painting, reading each placard. His face was carefully blank, but I could see the muscle twitching in his jaw, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. Mom looked like she'd been crying for days. Kyle looked uncomfortable, like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else. The lawyer looked alert and calculating, probably cataloging potential defamation claims. Dad completed the circuit and walked straight to me. The entire gallery went silent, 80 people holding their breath. "Are you satisfied?" he said quietly. "Are you going to apologize for doing what was best for you?" "No." "Then I guess we're done here." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You've humiliated me publicly. You've damaged my reputation in the business community. You've made our family a laughingstock. I hope it was worth it." Every penny of your money that I spent on this gallery space, I whispered back. Every hour I spent creating these paintings, every person in this room who now knows exactly what you did, yes, it was worth it. Something cracked in his expression, real emotion breaking through that controlled facade. Hurt, maybe, or anger, or the dawning realization that I really, truly meant every word. You're not my daughter anymore, he said. And there it was, the final severing, the last bridge burning. Good, I said, because you haven't been my father since the day you stole from me. He turned and walked out, Mom and Kyle trailing behind him. The lawyer lingered a moment longer, looking at me like he was trying to decide if I was worth the trouble of a lawsuit, then followed them out. The gallery stayed silent for about 5 more seconds, then someone started clapping, then someone else. Then suddenly the entire room was applauding and people were crowding around me, and Martha Chen was crying and hugging me, and a journalist was asking if I had a minute for follow-up questions. The exhibition ran for 6 hours. Over 200 people cycled through. The art blogger's video got thousands of views in the first day. The Oregonian ran a front-page feature in their arts and culture section titled "When Family Legacy Meets Family Betrayal: The Story Behind 12 Paintings." And I just stood there in my gallery space, surrounded by my interpretations of my grandmother's collection, by the physical manifestation of my grief and anger and love, and I felt not happy exactly, not victorious, but right, like I'd done what needed to be done, like I'd honored the promise I'd made to Grandma Aliner, even if it had cost me my family. That night, after everyone had left and the museum had closed, I sat alone in the gallery space one more time. The paintings looked different in the dim security lighting, softer somehow, less angry. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Ms. Mitchell, this is David Nakamura, son of Kenji Nakamura. I saw the article about your exhibition. My father's piece was in your grandmother's collection. I understand your father sold it. I'd like to help you get it back. Please call me. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart suddenly pounding. Get it back, the paintings, maybe not all of them, but maybe some of them. I looked around at my 12 interpretations hanging on the walls, at this monument I'd built to betrayal and loss. And for the first time since my father had stolen those paintings, I felt something that might have been hope. But that hope, that possibility of actually recovering what had been taken from me, that opened up a whole new chapter in this war, and trust me, what happened next made everything that came before look like just the opening act. I called David Nakamura the next morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm but professional. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for calling back. Please call me Amber, and thank you for reaching out. I'm not sure what you mean about helping me get the painting back. My father passed away 3 years ago, David said. But before he died, he told me about your grandmother, how she was one of the first collectors to take his work seriously back in the 80s, how she'd visit his studio in Seattle, how she'd recommend him to other collectors. She changed his life, really, made his career possible. My throat tightened. I didn't know that. When I saw the article about what your father did, I was furious, and then I did some research. I found out who bought my father's piece from the Seattle gallery that handled the sale. You did. His name is Preston Whitmore. He's a tech CEO in Bellevue, buys art as investment, keeps it in climate-controlled storage, probably never even looks at it. I called him yesterday. My heart was racing now, and I told him the story about your grandmother championing my father's work, about how she wanted you to have that piece, about what your father did. And Preston, well, he's not a bad guy, just a businessman who didn't know the history. He's willing to sell it back to you. I can't afford. At cost what he paid for it, $85,000. I sank into my desk chair, my legs suddenly weak. $85,000. I had that money. It was sitting in the blood money account my father had set up. Why would he do that? I asked. Because I told him if he didn't, I'd make sure every article written about my father's work from here on out mentioned that one of his pieces was held by someone who'd knowingly bought stolen property. It wasn't technically stolen. Wasn't it though? David's voice was sharp. Your grandmother left it to you explicitly. Your father took it without permission and sold it for profit. In any moral sense that matters, it was stolen. Preston understood that. He doesn't want that association with his collection. I was quiet for a long moment, processing. Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me. Because my father would have wanted me to, because art isn't just about money, it's about relationships and legacy and honoring the people who believed in us. Your grandmother believed in my father. This is me believing in you. We talked for another 20 minutes. He gave me Preston's contact information, told me to move quickly before he changed his mind, wished me luck. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. One painting, I could get one painting back. It wouldn't be all 12, it wouldn't restore everything my father had destroyed, but it would be something real and tangible, something that proved what he'd done wasn't irreversible. I called Preston Whitmore that afternoon. He was brisk but not unkind, like a man who'd agreed to do something good but wanted it handled quickly so he could move on. David explained the situation. I'll sell you the Nakamura at cost, $85,000. I'll eat the transaction fees and the Seattle Gallery's commission, so we're already tal. King about me losing money on this deal, but I don't want this drama attached to my collection. I understand, thank you, really. Wire the money to this account and I'll have the painting shipped to you. Insured professional art handlers should arrive within a week. He gave me the wire information and hung up, just like that, businesslike, transactional. But that painting would be mine again, really mine. I pulled up the bank account my father had set up, $247,000 from selling my inheritance. I transferred $85,000 to Preston Whitmore, watching the numbers change on the screen. One painting back, 11 to go. The exhibition at the museum ran for 3 weeks. The response was overwhelming, more press coverage, more visitors, more outrage directed at my father. I started getting messages from other people asking if I could help track down the other paintings. Art collectors expressing interest in buying my interpretations, the paintings I'd created in response to the lost originals. I hadn't even considered selling them. They'd been created as a statement, not as merchandise. But when a gallery owner offered me $15,000 for my interpretation of the White Horse portraits, I started thinking differently. That money could help me buy back more of the originals. Over the next month, I sold 7 of my 12 interpretation pieces, not to random buyers but to people who understood their significance. A collector who'd known my grandmother bought 2. The Portland Museum itself bought 1 for their permanent collection. An indigenous art advocacy organization bought my White Horse interpretation to use in educational programs about cultural appropriation in the art world. The sales brought in just over $90,000. Combined with what was left of my father's blood money, I had enough to potentially buy back 2 or 3 more paintings if I could find them and if the buyers were willing to sell. That's when things got interesting. The Oregonian article had included details about all 12 paintings, what they were, who the original artists were, approximate values. It was meant to document what had been lost, but it had an unintended consequence. It became a roadmap for anyone trying to find them. And apparently, I wasn't the only one looking. 6 weeks after the exhibition, I got a call from a gallery in San Francisco, the Westridge Gallery, which according to my father had bought 3 of the paintings. The woman on the phone sounded nervous. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Caroline Westridge. I think we need to talk." "About the paintings?" "Yes, about the paintings and about your father and about a rather complicated situation we found ourselves in." We arranged to meet the following week. I flew down to San Francisco on a Friday, using more of the blood money for the plane ticket, and took a rideshare to the Westridge Gallery in Pacific Heights. It was elegant, the kind of gallery that screamed old money and serious collectors. Caroline Westridge met me in a private viewing room, a woman in her 50s with perfect silver hair and worried eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to handle this situation for weeks." "What situation?" She gestured to 3 paintings hanging on the wall of the viewing room. I recognized them immediately: the Chen's still life, one of the White Horse portraits, and a small abstract piece by an artist named Reeves that Grandma had bought in 2008. You still have them, I breathed. We do, but here's the problem. After your exhibition made news, I did some research into the provenance of these pieces. Your father presented documentation claiming he was the executor of your grandmother's estate and had full authority to sell these works. Technically, that was true, but he never mentioned the provisions in her will about these specific pieces being designated for you or her instructions not to sell them. So I've consulted with our attorneys, and they believe if you challenged the sale in court, you'd have a strong case that the sale was made in bad faith, that your father deliberately withheld material information about the provenance and circumstances of the sale. That makes the transaction potentially voidable. My heart was pounding. Are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to be in the middle of a lawsuit between you and your father. And more than that, I don't want my gallery associated with selling pieces that were taken against the deceased's explicit wishes. It's bad for business, bad for our reputation. What do you want to do? Caroline took a deep breath. I want to return them to you, all three, in exchange for a full refund of what we paid, $54,000, and your agreement not to pursue any legal action against the gallery. I stared at her. 3 paintings, 3 of the 12 just returned for the exact amount my father had been paid. Yes, I said immediately. Yes, absolutely yes. She smiled, looking relieved. I'll have our lawyers draw up the paperwork. We'll need to move carefully. Your father will likely be furious when he finds out, and he may try to claim we're breaching our contract with him. But our attorneys believe we're on solid legal ground given the circumstances. He'll definitely be furious, I said, but that's not your problem, it's his. We signed the papers that afternoon. I wired the $54,000 from the blood money account. 3 days later, professional art movers delivered 3 paintings to my apartment, carefully packed, fully insured, with all documentation included. I hung them on my walls and cried for an hour straight. 4 paintings back, 8 to go. Word spread fast in the art world. Within 2 weeks, I got calls from 2 of the other buyers, a private collector in Portland who'd bought one of the smaller pieces and a gallery in Eugene that had purchased another. Both had seen the coverage of the Westridge Gallery returning the paintings. Both were worried about the legal and reputational implications of keeping art with such a controversial provenance. Both offered to sell back to me at cost. By the end of June, 4 months after my father had stolen the paintings, I had 7 of the 12 back. 7 paintings hanging in my tiny apartment, which was starting to feel less like a living space and more like a proper gallery. The remaining 5 were proving harder to track down. 2 had been sold to private collectors who weren't responding to outreach. One had gone to a gallery in Los Angeles that was currently reviewing the situation. One was owned by a collector in Vancouver who'd explicitly said he had no intention of selling. In one, the Turner landscape, the most valuable piece, had seemingly disappeared. None of the galleries would tell me who'd bought it, citing client confidentiality. But I had 7 more than half. It felt like a miracle. And then my father's lawyers sent me a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, certified mail, thick envelope, expensive letterhead. I knew what it was before I opened it. Demand to cease and desist. The letter was 8 pages of legal language that boiled down to this. I was to immediately stop making false and defamatory statements about Richard Mitchell. I was to remove all content from the exhibition that mentioned him by name. I was to issue a public apology. And I was to return all paintings that had been improperly reacquired to their rightful buyers. If I didn't comply within 30 days, they'd file a lawsuit for defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and several other intimidating legal terms I had to Google. I called Mr. Chen, the estate lawyer, who referred me to a litigator he knew, a woman named Patricia Hardwick who specialized in art law and estate disputes. Patricia read through the letter during our first meeting, her expression unreadable. She was in her 40s, dressed in a sharp suit, with the kind of confidence that made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely screwed. "This is mostly bluster," she said finally. "Your father's attorneys are trying to scare you into backing down, but you haven't done anything illegal." "I haven't." "No, truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Everything you've said about what your father did is factually accurate. He did sell those paintings, he did do it against your grandmother's wishes, he did do it without your permission. Stating those facts isn't defamation." "What about the tortious interference part?" "That's trickier. Technically, by contacting the buyers and explaining the situation, you could be seen as interfering with their contracts with your father. But given the circumstances, that your grandmother explicitly left these pieces to you, you have a strong argument that you were acting to protect your own legal interests. So what do I do? Patricia leaned back in her chair. That depends on what you want the outcome to be. We could ignore this letter and wait for them to sue, then fight it out in court. We could send a response letter pushing back, or, and this is the nuclear option, we could sue him first. Sue my father. For breach of fiduciary duty as executor of the estate, for conversion of property that was designated for you, for violating the explicit terms of your grandmother's will. You'd be asking the court to force him to help you recover the remaining paintings and to pay damages for the ones that can't be recovered. The idea of actually suing my father, of taking him to court, making this even more public and ugly, made my stomach turn. But at the same time, he'd drawn first blood, he'd stolen from me, and now he was threatening to sue me for trying to get back what was mine. How much would it cost to sue him? Probably $50,000 to $75,000 in legal fees, maybe more if it goes to trial, and there's no guarantee you'd win. Estate law is complicated, and judges have broad discretion. I thought about the money sitting in that blood money account, about $50,000 left after buying back the 7 paintings, not quite enough for a full legal battle. But maybe enough to send a message. Send them a response letter, I said. Push back hard, make it clear I'm not backing down, and if they actually file a lawsuit, then we'll talk about countersuing. Patricia smiled. I can work with that. The response letter went out 3 days later. I didn't get to read it before it was sent. Patricia said it was better that way for legal privilege reasons, but she summarized it for me. Essentially, thanks for the threatening letter, but our client has done nothing wrong. Everything she said is provably true. And if you'd like to explain to a judge why Mr. Mitchell violated his mother's explicit testamentary wishes for personal profit, we're happy to have that conversation in court. I didn't hear from my father's lawyers after that, but I did hear from my father. He showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning in early August. I'd been up late the night before working on a new painting, not an interpretation this time, but something original, something that felt like moving forward rather than looking back. The knock on my door startled me. I checked the peephole and felt my stomach drop. I almost didn't open it, but then I thought about everything that had happened, everything I'd fought for, and I decided I wasn't going to hide from him in my own home. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. His expensive suit seemed to hang differently on his frame, like he'd lost weight. There were shadows under his eyes. Amber, can we talk? I don't think we have anything to say to each other. Please, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into my apartment and stopped, staring at the walls. At the 7 paintings hanging there, the 4 I'd bought back, the 3 from the Westridge Gallery, his face went through a series of emotions too quick to name. You got them back, he said quietly. 7 of them, working on the other 5. He nodded slowly, still looking at the paintings. They look good here, better than they did in storage. They were never supposed to be in storage, Dad. They were supposed to be with me. That's what Grandma wanted. He finally looked at me. I know. What? I know. I knew when I sold them. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was against her wishes. I convinced myself that I knew better, that protecting you financially was more important than respecting her sentimentality. It wasn't sentimentality, it was love. It was 18 years of relationship, of teaching me to see the world differently. It was her legacy. I know that now. His voice cracked slightly. I've had 4 months to think about nothing else. 4 months of people in the art community treating me like a pariah. 4 months of knowing my own daughter won't speak to me. 4 months of understanding that I destroyed something irreplaceable for money I didn't even need. I crossed my arms, not letting myself feel sympathy. Not yet. Why are you here? To apologize, really apologize, not just try to justify what I did. I was wrong, Amber. I was so focused on what I thought was practical that I completely lost sight of what actually mattered. I betrayed your trust. I betrayed my mother's trust. I turned something beautiful and meaningful into a transaction. Yes, you did. And I can't undo that. I can't bring back what I took, but I can help you get the rest of them back. I stared at him. What? The Turner landscape, the one you haven't been able to find. I know who bought it. My heart started pounding. Who? A collector named Marcus Webb in Seattle, private collector, very reclusive. He paid $120,000 for it. But he's not someone who responds to letters or phone calls from people he doesn't know. He'd respond to me, though. Why would you help me now? Dad was quiet for a long moment. Because I can't live with what I've done, because every time I look at your mother, I see disappointment. Every time I see my colleagues, I see judgment. Every time I think about my mother, I feel like I've failed her in the worst possible way. I can't fix this completely, but maybe I can start making it right. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly, but I'd trusted him before and he'd betrayed me in the worst way possible. If you really want to help, I said carefully, then yes, contact Marcus Webb, tell him the story, ask him to sell it back. But Dad, if this is some kind of trick, if you're trying to manipulate me or make yourself look good. It's not, I swear to you it's not, I want to do at least one thing right in this whole mess. He left shortly after, leaving me standing in my up. Our tea meant feeling confused and cautiously hopeful and still angry, but maybe, possibly, the tiniest bit willing to consider forgiveness. Maybe. 2 weeks later, Marcus Webb called me. His voice was deep and formal, like someone used to being in control of every conversation. Ms. Mitchell, your father contacted me regarding the Turner landscape. He explained the situation. And I'm willing to sell it back to you, not at cost. I think we both know the painting has appreciated in value in the months since I purchased it, and I'm a businessman. But at a fair price, $110,000, $10,000 less than I paid. I did the math quickly. I had about $50,000 left in the blood money account. I'd made another $20,000 selling the last of my interpretation pieces. I'd need to find $40,000 more. Can I have some time to get the money together? You have until the end of September. After that, the offer expires. I spent the next 6 weeks in a blur of activity. I took out a personal loan for $20,000. I sold my car, I barely used it living in Portland anyway, for another $12,000. I picked up freelance curation work for 3 different galleries. I even started a GoFundMe explaining the situation, which raised $8,000 from people who'd followed the story and wanted to help. By September 28th, I had the money, all of it, every penny. I wired it to Marcus Webb and held my breath for 3 days until the painting arrived. Professional handlers, climate-controlled transport, full insurance, authenticated documentation. The Turner landscape, the piece Grandma had found at an estate sale in 1991, not knowing what she had until years later. The piece she'd told me reminded her of the coast where she'd grown up. The most valuable piece in the collection. I hung it on my wall and cried. 8 paintings back, 4 to go. Over the next 3 months, I tracked down 2 more. Another buyer willing to sell at cost after my father, true to his word, contacted them and explained the full story. Another gallery that decided the publicity wasn't worth the controversy. 10 paintings, 10 out of 12. The last 2 remained elusive. One had been sold to a collector in Hong Kong who had no interest in selling. The other had been purchased by someone whose identity was protected by attorney-client privilege, and no amount of research could uncover who they were. But I had 10. In February, almost exactly 1 year after my father had stolen them, I organized a new exhibition. Not at the museum this time, but at my own studio space. I'd used the last of the blood money to lease a proper studio in the Pearl District, complete with gallery walls and good lighting and enough space to properly display all 10 recovered paintings. I called it 10 Paintings, a legacy restored almost. The opening was smaller than the first exhibition. Quieter, more about celebration than anger. The art community came out again, collectors who'd known Grandma Aliner, artists she'd championed, friends and colleagues who'd followed the story. And my father came. I'd invited him, not because I'd fully forgiven him, I wasn't sure I ever would completely, but because over the past year he'd proven he meant his apology. He'd helped me track down buyers. He'd made introductions. He'd even testified as a witness when one buyer tried to claim he didn't know the circumstances of the sale and my lawyer had to threaten litigation. He'd shown up consistently, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant admitting publicly that he'd been wrong. He stood in my gallery looking at the 10 paintings on the walls, and I saw tears in his eyes. "She'd be proud of you," he said quietly. "Your grandmother, she'd be so proud of what you've done." "I'm still angry at you," I said. "I need you to know that. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust you again. I know I don't expect you to, I just hope that maybe someday you'll let me try to earn it back." We stood there in silence, looking at the paintings, at the legacy we'd both almost destroyed and that I'd fought to restore. My mother came too, hesitant and careful. We'd been slowly rebuilding our relationship, but it was fragile. I still hadn't fully forgiven her for knowing what Dad planned to do and not warning me, but she was trying. That counted for something. Even Kyle showed up looking sheepish. He'd paid me back the money Dad had given him from selling my inheritance, $18,000 that he'd saved up over 8 months. We weren't close like we'd been before, but we were talking again. That was a start. The exhibition ran for 6 weeks. It got coverage in the local arts press, though not the national attention the first one had. This story was quieter, less sensational, less about betrayal and more about persistence, about fighting for what matters even when it seems impossible. A few days before the exhibition closed, I got an unexpected visitor. An elderly Asian woman walked into the gallery accompanied by a younger man who I realized after a moment was David Nakamura, the artist's son who'd first helped me get the Nakamura painting back. "Amber," David said, "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Janet Reeves, widow of Marcus Reeves. You have one of her late husband's pieces in your grandmother's collection." The small abstract piece from 2008, one of the two I hadn't been able to recover. "Mrs. Reeves," I said, shaking her hand, "it's an honor to meet you." She smiled, warm but sad. "David told me your story about your grandmother, about what happened, about how you fought to get the collection back. My Marcus would have loved that. He always said art was about passion, not profit. Your husband was incredibly talented. My grandmother told me she'd been following his work for years before she bought that piece. I know, she wrote him a letter when she purchased it, told him exactly why his work moved her. He kept that letter in his studio until he died." Mrs. Reeves reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I found it again recently when I was going through his things, and it made me think about what art really means, what it's really for." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a letter in my grandmother's handwriting, dated 2008, telling Marcus Reeves that his painting reminded her of the joy of discovery, of seeing something familiar in a completely new way. I recognized her handwriting, recognized her way of finding meaning in the smallest details. "Mrs. Reeves, this is beautiful. Thank you for showing it to me." "That's not why I came," she said. "I came because I bought the painting back from the collector in Hong Kong. It took some negotiating and I paid more than I should have, but I got it, and I want you to have it." I stared at her. I can't accept that. The painting must have cost." "I don't want your money, dear. I want Marcus's painting to be where it belongs, with someone who understands what it means, with someone who'll honor the relationship between artist and collector, with Elinor's granddaughter." She pulled out another envelope, this one containing transfer papers, all filled out and signed, officially transferring ownership of the Reeves painting to me. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe, just nodded and took the envelope with shaking hands. "There's a condition," Mrs. Reeves added. "When you eventually display the full collection, if you get all 12 back, I want you to include my husband's letter from your grandmother. I want people to know that's what art can be, that kind of connection, that kind of meaning." "I promise," I managed to say. "I absolutely promise." She left shortly after, leaving me standing in my gallery holding the transfer papers and my grandmother's letter, tears streaming down my face. 11 paintings, 11 out of 12. One left to find. The last piece, one of the White Horse portraits, remained hidden. The buyer's identity was locked behind legal protections and no amount of investigation had uncovered who they were. I'd spent a year searching and I'd come so close, so impossibly close. But I had 11. I'd started with none, with bare walls and broken trust and a father who'd chosen money over meaning. and I'd fought my way to 11 pieces of my grandmother's legacy. 11 pieces that hung in my studio telling their stories again. Was it enough? I didn't know. Some days it felt like victory, other days it felt like I'd still lost something irreplaceable. But then I'd remember Grandma Alina in her sunroom studio holding my hand, telling me stories about each painting. And I'd realize that the real legacy wasn't the paintings themselves, though they mattered, God, they mattered. The real legacy was understanding that some things are worth fighting for. That meaning matters more than money, that relationships and stories and love are what make art more than just objects on walls. And I'd learned that, I'd proven that. I'd taken my father's betrayal and turned it into something that honored what Grandma Alina had taught me. The gallery became my studio, became my home in a way that physical space never had before. I quit my job at the small gallery and started freelancing as a curator and consultant. I built a reputation in the Portland arts community, not just as the woman whose father stole her inheritance, though that was part of it, but as someone who understood what art meant, someone who could tell the stories behind the pieces. I was happy, not perfectly happy. I still woke up some mornings angry about what had been taken. Still had a complicated, careful relationship with my father that might never be fully healed. Still missed Grandma Alina with an ache that sometimes took my breath away. But I was happy. And then, 18 months after my father first stole those paintings, I got a phone call that changed everything one more time. Ms. Mitchell, this is Catherine Z.H. Ang from the Portland Art Museum. We have a rather unusual situation and we were hoping you could come in to discuss it. I met with Catherine 3 days later in her office overlooking the museum's sculpture court. A donor has come forward, she said carefully. Someone who wishes to remain anonymous. They've offered to fund the acquisition of a painting for our permanent collection, a specific painting. Okay. The final white horse portrait, the one you've been unable to locate. My heart stopped. You found it. The donor found it, and they've negotiated to purchase it from the current owner, but there's a condition. What condition? Catherine smiled. They want to loan it to you, indefinitely. It will technically belong to the museum, but you'll have custody of it. It will hang in your studio, completing your grandmother's collection for as long as you want it there. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, it will return to the museum and be displayed with a full provenance note explaining the story of the collection, your grandmother, and what you did to recover it. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was saying. Who? I finally managed. Who is the donor? They've asked to remain anonymous. But I knew, somehow I knew. I went home that night and called my father. Did you buy the last painting? I asked when he answered. Silence, then quietly, the museum asked me not to tell you. Why? Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. I didn't want you to think I was trying to buy forgiveness or force a reconciliation. I wanted to finish fixing what I broke. Even if you never forgave me, even if we never had a real relationship again, I wanted you to have all 12 paintings the way my mother intended. I was crying now silently, tears streaming down my face. How much did it cost? It doesn't matter. Dad. It doesn't matter, Amber. No amount of money could undo what I did. But this, getting you that last painting, it's not redemption, it's not forgiveness, it's just what I should have done in the first place, honoring my mother, honoring you. We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked for the first time in almost 2 years, about Grandma Alina, about why he'd made the choices he'd made, about his own father who'd taught him that everything could be reduced to numbers and profit margins, about how he'd lost sight of the fact that some things transcend transaction. I didn't forgive him, not completely, not yet. But I understood him, and maybe that was a start. The 12th painting arrived at my studio 2 weeks later, the final white horse portrait, showing an elder woman with eyes that seemed to see through time itself. Grandma had told me once that this painting reminded her that wisdom comes from surviving loss with grace. I hung it on the wall with the other 11, completing the collection for the first time since my grandmother's death. 12 paintings, the Alina Mitchell collection, complete. I stood in my studio looking at them all together, and I felt her presence so strongly it was almost physical, like she was standing next to me again, her hand on my shoulder, whispering that she was proud. Art isn't about what you see, Amber, it's about what you feel. It's about the story the artist couldn't put into words. I told a story with these paintings, a story about betrayal and recovery, about family and legacy, about fighting for meaning in a world that too often reduces everything to dollars and cents. And in the end, I'd won. Not perfectly, not without scars, but I'd won. The collection stayed in my studio for 3 more years. During that time, I built something beautiful, a consulting business helping families navigate the complexities of art inheritance, educational programs teaching young people about the importance of legacy and meaning, relationships with artists and collectors built on respect and understanding rather than transactions. My father and I slowly, carefully rebuilt our relationship. It would never be what it was before, too much had been broken for that. But it became something new, something honest. He'd come to the studio sometimes and we'd look at the paintings together and he'd tell me stories about his mother that I'd never heard, about the woman she'd been before I knew her, before I'd come along. And gradually, painfully, I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing. It's about choosing to move forward while still honoring what was lost. 3 years after recovering the final painting, I donated the full collection to the Portland Art Museum. Not sold, donated. Put it in my grandmother's name with the full story of the collection displayed alongside it. The 12 pieces she'd gathered over 60 years. The 12 pieces she'd left to me. The 12 pieces I'd fought to keep together. The museum created a permanent gallery space for them, the Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Collection. Why included everything: the original paintings, documentation of their acquisition histories, photographs of my grandmother, copies of her letters explaining why she'd bought each piece, the placards from my original Betrayal exhibition, and yes, Marcus Reeves's letter that Mrs. Reeves had asked me to display. And they included my story, the theft, the recovery, the fight to honor a legacy against forces that wanted to reduce it to profit margins. At the donation ceremony, I gave a speech to a room full of collectors, artists, museum board members, and journalists. My grandmother taught me that art is about relationships, I said. About the connection between artist and viewer, about the stories we tell through beauty and meaning. My father forgot that for a while. He saw these paintings as assets to be managed, problems to be solved practically. But we all learned that some things can't be reduced to balance sheets. Some things are worth fighting for, not because they're valuable, but because they're meaningful. I saw my father in the audience standing with my mother. He was crying openly, not trying to hide it. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something like peace. The exhibition opened to the public the following week. Thousands of people came to see it. Art students studying legacy and ethics, families grappling with their own inheritance questions, people who'd followed the story and wanted to see how it ended. And they saw 12 paintings hanging together the way Eleanor Mitchell had always intended, telling their stories, honoring the relationships between artists and collectors, proving that meaning can survive even the worst betrayals. I visit the gallery sometimes, stand in front of those 12 pieces and remember 18 years of Sundays, remember my grandmother's voice explaining why each one mattered, remember the feeling of bare walls in my apartment and the rage that had driven me to fight. And I remember that we win not by being perfect, but by refusing to let the wrong things define us. My name is Amber Mitchell. My father stole my inherited art collection, and I turned his betrayal into a legacy that will outlive us all. That's my story. Thank you for being here for this entire journey. Drop a comment telling me, would you have forgiven your father, would you have donated the collection or kept it, and most importantly, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You never know what story I'll tell next.